Hey everyone, welcome to Midnight Mystic Stories. I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It really helps the channel grow and helps us keep bringing more of the content you love. And be sure to comment below where you are tuning in from. Thank you and enjoy the video. It started like any other evening, scrolling through my phone while lounging on my couch, the glow of the screen illuminating the dimly lit room. I had recently downloaded a dating app, eager to dive into the world of online connections. After swiping through countless profiles, I stumbled upon a guy named Ethan. His photos were striking: dark hair, intense blue eyes, a charming smile that seemed to promise adventure. His bio was simple yet intriguing, mentioning a love for horror movies and a penchant for late-night drives. That was enough to catch my attention. We matched almost instantly, and the conversation flowed easily between us. Ethan had a way of making everything feel exciting, like we were in on some secret that the rest of the world didn't know about. He suggested we meet up for coffee the next day, and I accepted without hesitation, feeling a thrill of anticipation. The following afternoon, I arrived at the small, cozy cafe where we agreed to meet. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sweet scent of pastries, wrapping around me like a warm blanket. I settled into a corner booth, glancing at the door every few minutes, my heart racing with both excitement and nerves. But as the minutes ticked by, I started to feel a gnawing sense of unease. I checked my phone, but there were no messages from him. Just as I was about to give up and leave, the door swung open, and there he was. Ethan walked in, a confident stride in his step, and my heart skipped a beat. He flashed that charming smile and made his way over. We chatted over coffee, and I quickly realized he was even more captivating in person. He spoke with passion, his eyes lighting up as he recounted tales of his favorite horror films, his voice low and captivating. I was drawn in completely. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cafe, Ethan suggested we take a drive. I hesitated for a moment. I barely knew him, but something in his gaze urged me to let go of my reservations. I agreed, and we headed to his car, an old but well-maintained black sedan. The interior smelled faintly of leather and cologne, and I felt a thrill of excitement as he started the engine. Driving through the quiet streets, we talked about everything and nothing, laughter punctuating the air between us. But soon, we ventured out of the city, the lights fading behind us as we entered a more secluded area. The road twisted and turned, surrounded by dense trees that loomed like sentinels in the darkness. The thrill of the adventure was palpable, but as the landscape shifted, a gnawing unease began to creep in. Ethan turned down a narrow dirt path, the headlights illuminating the way ahead. I asked him where we were going, but he merely smiled and said it was a surprise. My heart raced, but I tried to push aside the worry. I wanted to trust him, to enjoy the moment. Eventually, we arrived at a small clearing, a forgotten abandoned cabin standing solemnly among the trees. My unease deepened as I looked at the dilapidated structure, its windows dark and empty, resembling hollow eyes staring back at us. Ethan, however, seemed invigorated by the discovery. He hopped out of the car, urging me to follow him. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to leave. But curiosity got the better of me. The air was thick with tension as we approached the cabin, the wooden planks creaking underfoot. Inside, the remnants of a long-abandoned life lay scattered, a dusty couch, broken furniture, and peeling wallpaper that whispered secrets of the past. Ethan's excitement was infectious as he explored the place, his laughter echoing in the silence. I tried to match his enthusiasm, but the shadows felt heavier around me, pressing against my skin. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were intruding on something that should remain undisturbed. As we wandered deeper into the cabin, I noticed something odd. A series of photographs hung on the walls, their subjects frozen in time. Each image depicted a different person, all smiling, but there was something unsettling about their expressions. It was as if they were all too happy, too perfect. I felt a chill creep up my spine, and I turned to Ethan, wanting to share my discomfort, but he was too engrossed in the moment to notice. Then it hit me. I recognized one of the faces in the photographs. It was a girl from my high school, someone I hadn't seen in years. My stomach dropped as I pointed her out to Ethan, but he merely waved it off, claiming it was just a coincidence. I wanted to believe him, but the unease was growing into something more sinister. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. I glanced at the door, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure lurking outside. But when I looked again, there was nothing. My heart raced as I tried to shake off the creeping dread. Ethan seemed oblivious to my rising panic. He rummaged through an old trunk in the corner, pulling out objects that seemed to belong to the people in the photographs. A rusted locket, a cracked mirror, and a faded diary. With each item, my anxiety deepened. It all felt wrong, like we were trespassing on someone's memories, someone's life. I tried to suggest we leave, but Ethan's enthusiasm was overwhelming. He wanted to dig deeper, to uncover whatever secrets this place held. I felt trapped by his energy, my instincts clashing with my desire to let loose and enjoy the thrill of the unknown. As he continued to sift through the trunk, I noticed something peculiar, a small notebook wedged in the corner. Curiosity got the better of me, and I reached for it. The pages were filled with frantic scrawls, detailing the lives of the people in the photographs, their stories twisted into something dark. The last entry sent a chill down my spine, recounting a series of disappearances, all connected to this cabin. Ethan turned to me, excitement in his eyes, but I was frozen, the weight of the words heavy in my mind. I tried to tell him we needed to go, but he brushed it off, his smile fading into something more intense. I could see a glimmer of something in his gaze, a hunger for the thrill that made my skin crawl. Suddenly, the cabin door slammed shut with a deafening bang, and the air seemed to freeze. I whipped around, panic rising in my chest. Ethan's expression had transformed. The warmth and charm had vanished, replaced by an unsettling focus. He stepped closer, invading my space, his voice low as he spoke about the cabin being a place of power, a magnet for souls. I backed away, heart racing, as he continued, weaving tales of how the spirits of those who had vanished remained tied to this place, drawn in by its darkness. I realized with horror that he wasn't just fascinated. He was enthralled, almost possessed by the fear that surrounded us. With adrenaline pumping, I bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. Ethan laughed softly, the sound echoing eerily in the silence. I felt a surge of desperation as I pushed against the wood, but it was futile. The darkness around us thickened, and I could almost hear whispers in the air, taunting me. Just when I thought I was trapped, the door creaked open, revealing the night outside. I dashed into the cool air, stumbling into the forest, branches snagging at my clothes as I sprinted away from the cabin and from Ethan. I could hear him calling after me, his voice now a mix of laughter and something darker, something that made my blood run cold. I ran blindly through the trees, the moonlight barely cutting through the thick canopy above. My heart pounded in my ears as I pushed forward, the sounds of the night morphing into a cacophony of terror. I could sense him behind me, the thrill of the chase fueling his pursuit. Finally, I burst onto the dirt road, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I flagged down a passing car, desperate and terrified. The driver stopped, and I scrambled inside, heart racing as I glanced back. The cabin loomed in the distance, shadows swirling around it like a living thing. As we sped away, I thought I could see Ethan standing at the edge of the trees, a figure caught between the light and dark, a smile frozen on his face. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, realizing I had escaped, but the memory of that night would haunt me. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to put the experience behind me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan was still out there, lurking in the shadows. One evening, as I scrolled through social media, I stumbled upon a post that sent chills through me. It was a photo of the cabin, but it wasn't just the cabin. It was Ethan, standing in front of it, arms outstretched, his smile wide and inviting. The caption read, "The perfect place to find your soulmates." Beneath it, comments from people who had disappeared over the years flooded in, each one more unsettling than the last. I felt the world close in around me as realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I hadn't escaped at all. I had just become one of the many souls entwined in that cursed place, forever tethered to a darkness that promised adventure but delivered only despair. The thought of swiping right on some random stranger felt about as appealing as eating a soggy sandwich. But when my best friend convinced me to try a dating app called Hinge, I figured, why not? I could use a little excitement in my life. After a few weeks of swiping and chatting, I matched with a guy named Ethan. He had this charming smile, deep-set eyes that seemed to twinkle, and a bio that hinted at a love for adventure. I was intrigued. He suggested we meet up at a local cafe nestled in a quiet corner of the city, far from the bustling nightlife. It was one of those places that felt like a hidden gem, the kind of spot that had creaky wooden floors and the scent of freshly brewed coffee lingering in the air. As I approached the cafe, I noticed the streetlights flickering against the evening sky. It was one of those late autumn nights where the air had that crispness that made you feel alive. I pushed open the heavy wooden door, and the little bell above chimed softly, announcing my arrival. The cafe was dimly lit, with warm, yellow lights casting shadows that danced along the walls. I spotted Ethan sitting at a small table in the corner, his phone resting face down, as if he were waiting for me to surprise him. Our conversation flowed easily, the kind where time slips away unnoticed. He spoke of his travels, his dreams of exploring abandoned places, and the thrill of pushing boundaries. There was something magnetic about him, a wildness that tugged at something deep within me. As the night wore on and the cafe began to empty, I felt a sense of exhilaration mixed with an underlying unease. Just as we were finishing our drinks, Ethan leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. He suggested we go for a walk, something about the night being too beautiful to waste. I hesitated, but the thought of adventure was intoxicating. I agreed, and we stepped out into the cool night air. The streets were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. We wandered down side streets, the moonlight illuminating our path, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist in the darkness. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Ethan was charming, but there was an intensity in his gaze that made my heart race. I shrugged it off, reminding myself that I was being paranoid. Eventually, we found ourselves in front of an old, abandoned building. It loomed overhead like a forgotten giant, its cracked walls and shattered windows beckoning us closer. I felt a chill run down my spine, but Ethan's excitement was contagious. He dared me to explore it with him, and despite my reservations, I found myself nodding. As we stepped inside, the air was thick with dust, and an unsettling silence enveloped us. The floorboards creaked under our weight, and I could feel my anxiety creeping in. The darkness closed around us, making every shadow seem alive. Ethan pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom. We wandered through empty rooms, each step echoing in the stillness. Ethan's laughter bounced off the walls, but I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. He led me to a large room, filled with broken furniture and remnants of a time long gone. I could almost hear whispers of the past, the stories trapped within the peeling wallpaper. Suddenly, Ethan stopped in front of a large, cracked mirror leaning against the wall. He stared into it, a strange look crossing his face. I stepped closer, peering over his shoulder. My heart sank when I saw my reflection alongside his, but it was distorted, warped as if something dark lurked beneath the surface. I felt a shiver run down my spine, an instinctive urge to step back. Ethan seemed entranced, his expression shifting from playful to serious. He turned to me, his eyes darkening as he spoke about the energy of the place, the history it held. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. There was something in his tone, a weight that made my skin crawl. I wanted to leave, but the door we had entered through felt miles away. I tried to brush off the unease, convincing myself it was just the atmosphere playing tricks on me. But as we moved deeper into the building, I felt like we were being watched. The air grew heavier, and the shadows seemed to stretch closer. I could hear the faintest sound, like whispers carried on the wind, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. Ethan stopped suddenly, his flashlight flickering as if it were struggling against something unseen. He muttered something about the energy of the place being strong, and I could feel my heart racing. I suggested we head back, but he insisted we explore just a little longer. I felt trapped, caught between a desire for adventure and a deep-rooted instinct to flee. As we entered a narrow corridor, the flashlight flickered again, and this time it went out completely, plunging us into darkness. Panic set in as I fumbled for my phone, the light illuminating the walls, revealing grotesque markings etched into the paint. Ethan's breath quickened beside me, and suddenly, I felt a cold rush of fear as I realized I was alone in the dark with him. I shone my phone's light at him, but his expression was no longer that of the charming man I had met earlier. His eyes glinted with something sinister, something that twisted my stomach. He stepped closer, and I instinctively backed away, my heart racing. The shadows danced around us, and I could feel the weight of the building pressing down. In a moment of sheer adrenaline, I turned and sprinted down the corridor, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear Ethan's footsteps behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I burst into a room and slammed the door shut, pressing my back against it as I gasped for breath. I fumbled for my phone again, the light flickering weakly. It was then that I noticed the walls were covered in photographs, images of people. Some I recognized from the dating app, others I didn't. My blood ran cold as I scanned the faces, a chilling realization washing over me. Ethan had been lying all along. Each photo told a story, an echo of past encounters, and I was just another name on his growing list. I stumbled back, my mind racing. I needed to find a way out. Panic surged as I heard the door rattling. Ethan's voice called out, but it sounded distorted, as if it were coming from somewhere deep within the building itself. I knew I had to escape. I darted towards a window, the glass cracked but still intact. I pushed against it, but it wouldn't budge. The rattling grew louder, and I could feel the door start to give way. I glanced back at the photographs one last time, my heart pounding with the sickening realization. They weren't just memories, they were trophies, each one a testament to his twisted game. In a desperate act, I grabbed a nearby chair and hurled it at the glass. It shattered, and I climbed through, the cold night air hitting my face like a slap. I hit the ground hard, but adrenaline propelled me forward. I ran, not looking back, not stopping until the city lights guided me home. I thought I was safe, breathing heavily as I collapsed onto my bed. But as I glanced at my phone, a notification popped up. It was a message from Ethan, and my stomach dropped. "I know where you live." I had escaped the building, but it seemed I was far from free. I had never been a fan of online dating. The whole idea felt like diving into a pool of sharks while blindfolded. But after my last relationship crashed and burned, I figured I'd give it a shot. I downloaded the app, swiped left on a few questionable profiles, and finally landed on someone named Jake. He looked normal enough, dark hair, a goofy smile, and a love for hiking, which was a bonus since I was always up for an adventure. We chatted for a couple of days, and he seemed cool. We discussed our favorite movies and shared embarrassing childhood stories. He told me about his job at a tech startup, and I shared my recent obsession with baking. Everything felt easy, as if we had known each other for years. So, when he suggested we meet at a coffee shop on the outskirts of town, I was surprisingly excited. The day of the date was gloomy, a thick blanket of clouds hanging overhead, but I shrugged it off. I wore my favorite sweater, the one that always made me feel cozy, and headed out. The coffee shop was nestled in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by trees that looked like they were holding their breath. As I walked in, the smell of freshly brewed coffee wrapped around me like a warm hug. I scanned the room for Jake, my heart racing a little. When I spotted him sitting at a corner table, I felt a wave of relief. He was even cuter in person, his smile wide and welcoming. We ordered our drinks and settled into easy conversation. But as the minutes ticked by, something felt slightly off. Jake was charming and funny, but there was a strange intensity in his gaze. It was like he was studying me, analyzing every word I said. I brushed it off, thinking I was just being paranoid. After a while, he suggested we take a walk in the nearby park. I agreed, thinking the fresh air would do us good. As we strolled along the winding paths, the clouds thickened, casting an eerie shadow over the park. The trees loomed overhead, their branches swaying in the wind as if whispering secrets. The atmosphere shifted. It felt charged, as if something was about to happen. Jake talked about his childhood, but his stories took on a darker tone. He mentioned how he always felt different from other kids, how he preferred to be alone. I nodded, trying to engage, but his words sent a chill down my spine. There was a rawness to his vulnerability that made me uneasy. I glanced around. The park was nearly empty, the few people who were there seeming to fade into the background. As we reached a secluded spot by a small pond, Jake stopped walking. He turned to me, his expression serious. He started talking about trust and connections, how sometimes you just know when you meet someone. I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. It was the kind of conversation that made the air heavy, and I could sense the shift in his demeanor. Suddenly, he leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper, discussing how people often wear masks, hiding their true selves. I felt exposed, like he was peeling back layers I hadn't even realized existed. I forced a smile, but inside, alarm bells were ringing. I glanced at my phone. It was getting late. I suggested we head back, but he didn't seem ready to let the moment go. He reached for my hand, and I felt a jolt of discomfort. I pulled away, trying to keep the mood light, but he didn't take the hint. Instead, he stepped closer, invading my personal space. I could see something flicker in his eyes, a kind of fervor that made my skin crawl. I started to back away slowly, my heart pounding. That's when I noticed the park seemed even quieter. The wind almost stilled. The trees stood like silent sentinels, and I felt the weight of their presence, as if they were witnesses to something sinister. I wanted to run, but couldn't shake the feeling that he would follow. I forced myself to breathe, to act calm. Jake's tone shifted again, becoming almost pleading. He started talking about how he had been waiting for someone like me, someone who could see beyond the surface. My instinct screamed at me to leave. I turned, taking a few steps back, trying to gauge his reaction. His eyes darkened, and I could see the shift. Suddenly, his expression twisted into something almost feral. It was as if the charming guy I had met earlier had been replaced by someone else entirely. Panic flooded my veins. I turned and broke into a run, my feet pounding on the gravel path, adrenaline surging through me. I could hear him calling after me, his voice distorted, echoing in my mind. I sprinted past the trees, dodging branches as I fled, the world around me blurring. The coffee shop was a beacon in the distance, and every step felt like a battle against the shadows creeping up on me. I could hear his footsteps behind me, closer than I wanted them to be. As I burst through the doors of the coffee shop, the warm light enveloped me. I glanced back, expecting to see Jake right behind me, but he was gone. Just like that, he had vanished into the thickening fog outside. I took a moment to catch my breath, my heart racing in my chest. The barista looked at me with concern, and I realized I must have looked like a ghost. I ordered a coffee, trying to steady my nerves, but the unease lingered. I kept replaying the events in my mind, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Just when I thought I could breathe a little easier, I received a notification on my phone. It was a message from Jake. My hands trembled as I opened it, half expecting more creepy declarations. But what I saw froze me in my tracks. It was a picture taken through the window of the coffee shop, showing me sitting at the counter, looking terrified, with Jake's shadow lurking just outside the glass. My heart dropped. I quickly glanced around, scanning the faces of strangers, looking for him. The weight of dread settled in my stomach as I realized he had been watching me the entire time, and that feeling of safety had been nothing but an illusion. The walls of the coffee shop felt like they were closing in on me, and I knew I had to get out. I slipped my phone into my pocket and decided to leave. As I stepped outside, the night had fully descended, and the streetlights flickered ominously. I walked quickly, keeping my head down, but every shadow felt like a threat. The streets were eerily quiet, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Finally reaching my apartment, I slammed the door behind me, locking it tight. I leaned against it, heart pounding, trying to process everything. I thought about filing a report, but then I remembered his intensity, the way he looked at me. I didn't want to give him any power over me. That night, I lay awake, jumping at every sound. I couldn't shake the feeling that Jake was still out there, lurking in the shadows. The image of his eyes, the way he had changed in an instant, haunted me. I decided I wouldn't let fear dictate my life, that I wouldn't let a single bad date ruin my chances of finding someone good. But the next morning, as I scrolled through my notifications, my heart dropped again. There was a new message from Jake, but this time it wasn't a creepy photo. It was a video. The thumbnail showed him with a smile, but the title sent chills down my spine. "You'll never guess who I really am." I hesitated, my finger hovering over the play button. My pulse raced, and I finally took a deep breath and pressed it. The screen flickered to life, and I braced myself for what was to come, knowing that whatever was on the other side would change everything. There I was, flicking through profiles on Hinge, feeling a mix of boredom and desperation. It wasn't that I didn't want a relationship. It was just that every match I made felt like a dead end. I had just about given up when I came across a profile that made me stop cold. His name was Alex, and his pictures were striking: dark hair, piercing blue eyes, an easy smile that felt oddly magnetic. There was something in his profile that drew me in, something that hinted at a depth I craved. He loved horror movies and ghost stories, and right then, my heart raced with excitement. I sent him a message, and within minutes, we were engrossed in a conversation that felt like a scene from a thriller. The rain picked up outside, drumming against the window as if it had a secret of its own. Alex had a way of making me feel like I was the only person in the world. He shared his favorite urban legends and paranormal experiences, and with each story, he wove an atmosphere thick with suspense. I could almost feel the chill creeping into my bones as he described the old, abandoned houses he explored at night, the shadows that danced just out of sight. I felt a thrill run through me, something electric. After a couple of days of messaging back and forth, we decided to meet. The plan was simple: grab coffee at a small cafe downtown, then maybe take a stroll through the nearby park. As the day of our date approached, I felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. What if he wasn't who he seemed? What if those captivating stories were just a facade? But curiosity won out. The cafe was quaint, with mismatched furniture and soft lighting that created a warm atmosphere. I arrived early, the aroma of brewing coffee filling the air. I glanced around, my heart racing with anticipation. When Alex finally walked in, my breath caught in my throat. He looked even better in person, his smile brightening the dim space. As we chatted over our drinks, the conversation flowed easily. He had an infectious laugh, and it felt like we'd known each other for ages. But as the hours ticked by, I noticed something unsettling. There was a flicker of intensity in his gaze, a hint of something lurking beneath the surface. It was as if he was analyzing me, studying my reactions, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into a narrative I didn't fully understand. After coffee, we decided to walk to the park. The rain had eased, leaving a mist that hung in the air. The trees loomed overhead, their branches swaying gently, casting elongated shadows on the path. It was eerie, yet somehow exhilarating. We talked about our favorite horror films, and Alex suggested we check out an old, supposedly haunted house nearby. The thrill of adventure sent a shiver down my spine, and I found myself nodding eagerly. The house was a decrepit Victorian that stood at the end of a narrow street. As we approached, the air grew colder, the atmosphere thickening with tension. There was something about the place that felt alive, almost as if it was breathing, and I couldn't tell if it was fear or excitement that made my heart race. Inside, the air was stale, and the floor creaked beneath our feet. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that filtered through the grimy windows. Alex led the way, his flashlight illuminating the peeling wallpaper and broken furniture that littered the rooms. He seemed to thrive in the darkness, his enthusiasm contagious. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were trespassing in a place that held too many secrets. As we moved deeper into the house, I noticed something odd. The walls seemed to whisper, shadows flickered just beyond the beam of our light, and I felt an inexplicable urge to turn back. But Alex was entranced, urging me to explore further. In one room, he found an old trunk, its hinges rusted and its surface covered in dust. He opened it with a creak, revealing a collection of faded photographs and strange artifacts that looked like they belonged to another era. I felt a chill creep up my spine as I glanced at the photos. There were images of families, their faces eerily blank, as if they were unaware they were being captured. When I looked at Alex, I could see that same intensity in his eyes, but there was something else too, a darkness that made my stomach twist. As he rummaged through the trunk, I stepped back. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with the weight of stories left untold. I glanced out into the hallway, the shadows reaching out like fingers. I needed to breathe. I turned to leave, but Alex's voice stopped me. "Wait, you have to see this." His voice had dropped to a low whisper, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. I turned back reluctantly, my heart pounding. He held up an old journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. This belonged to someone who lived here. They wrote about strange occurrences, things that happened at night. My curiosity was piqued, but the atmosphere felt heavier now, the air electric with tension. I stepped closer, peering over his shoulder as he flipped through the pages. The writing was frantic, filled with tales of voices in the night, shadows moving on their own, and a figure that haunted the house. My skin prickled with unease as I read the words, my imagination conjuring images of the house's past. And then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The last entry was dated just a few days prior, and the handwriting was unmistakably similar to Alex's. My heart raced as the realization hit me like a brick wall. This wasn't just a story, this was a warning. I stepped back, my instinct screaming at me to run, but Alex was still fixated on the journal, a look of obsession etched on his face. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen, closing in around us. I could hear my own heartbeat, pounding in my ears, drowning out the whispers of the house. In a sudden rush of clarity, I turned to leave, but Alex's hand shot out, gripping my wrist tightly. His eyes were wild, a mix of excitement and something darker. It was as if the house had awakened something in him, something that craved more than just a story. Panic surged through me as I yanked my arm away. Stumbling back, I darted for the door, my heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I could hear him calling after me, but all I could focus on was escaping. I burst into the hallway, the darkness closing in, the shadows shifting like living creatures. I sprinted down the stairs, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the air thick with dread. Finally, I burst outside, the cool night air hitting me like a wave. I didn't stop running until I was several blocks away, my heart racing and my mind reeling. I glanced back, half expecting to see Alex chasing me, but the house loomed silently behind me, shrouded in darkness. I didn't sleep that night, the events replaying in my mind like a horror film on repeat. The way his eyes had glinted with obsession, the journal filled with warnings. It was all too much. I deleted my Hinge account the next day, erasing any trace of Alex from my life. But as the days turned into weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, something dark and lurking. I would catch glimpses of shadows in the corners of my vision, whispers brushing against my ears when I was alone. I thought I was just imagining things, but then I received a message from an unknown number. It was a single word: found. My heart dropped, and the darkness that had crept into my life felt like a tightening noose. I realized then that some stories aren't just tales. Sometimes they're warnings. Sometimes they're the beginning of something far worse than I could ever have imagined. I had always been skeptical about online dating. It seemed like a breeding ground for weirdos and heartbreaks. But after my latest breakup, I figured why not? Everyone else was doing it, and it might be a fun way to meet new people. So I downloaded this trendy app, swiping left and right, chuckling at some profiles and feeling oddly excited about the potential matches. Then I came across his profile. He was tall, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes. His bio was charming, filled with a mix of humor and depth that resonated with me. We matched almost immediately, and after exchanging a few messages, I felt a strange connection. He said his name was Jake, and he lived in a small town a couple of hours away. Something about him felt different from the other guys I'd been chatting with. He was intense yet inviting, like a thrilling novel that promised both suspense and romance. Once we moved past the usual small talk, our conversations took a deeper turn. He shared his love for the eerie and the unknown, talking about horror movies and ghost stories. I found myself leaning into the intrigue, captivated by his tales of abandoned places and urban legends. Before I knew it, we decided to meet up at a quaint little diner halfway between our towns. I was buzzing with excitement and nerves, the kind that makes your palms sweaty and your heart race. When I pulled into the diner's parking lot, a sense of unease washed over me. The place was dimly lit, nestled between two larger, more modern buildings that were completely vacant. Something felt off, but I brushed it aside, reminding myself that I was just being paranoid. Jake was already inside, his back turned to me as I walked in. He was even more handsome in person, the way he carried himself giving off an air of confidence that I found magnetic. We chatted over greasy burgers and milkshakes, the conversation flowing easily. But as the night progressed, I noticed small oddities. He seemed overly interested in my life, asking questions that felt too personal for a first date. When I mentioned my childhood home, his expression shifted slightly, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just a coincidence. After we finished our meals, he suggested we take a walk nearby. I hesitated but agreed, feeling a mix of thrill and apprehension. As we stepped outside, the air felt heavier, almost suffocating. The streetlights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the sidewalk. We walked a few blocks until we reached an old, abandoned building that loomed over us like a forgotten giant. The windows were boarded up, and the door hung crookedly on its hinges. Jake's gaze was fixed on the building, an almost predatory glint in his eyes. He turned to me and said something about how he loved places like this, how they held stories waiting to be uncovered. My heart raced as he suggested we explore the structure. I felt a rush of adrenaline mixed with dread. I wanted to say no, to turn back to the safety of the diner, but something in me urged me to stay. We pushed the door open, and it creaked ominously. The darkness inside was suffocating, the faint smell of mildew and decay hitting me like a punch. Jake pulled out his phone, using the flashlight to illuminate the dusty interior. As we stepped inside, my senses heightened. Every creak of the floorboards echoed ominously, and shadows danced around us, taunting me with the idea of what might be lurking just out of sight. Jake led the way, his confidence unwavering as he explored the remnants of what once was. I followed reluctantly, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. We stumbled upon old furniture, broken glass, and remnants of a life long gone. The silence was deafening, interrupted only by the sound of our footsteps and Jake's occasional commentary about how creepy it felt. The deeper we went, the more I felt a sense of foreboding. It was as if the building itself was alive, absorbing our energy, feeding off our unease. I glanced at Jake, and he seemed in his element, almost exhilarated by the atmosphere. I felt like an intruder in someone else's nightmare. We reached a stairwell that spiraled downward into darkness. I hesitated, a chill creeping up my spine. I could feel the weight of the air pressing down on me, thick with anticipation. Jake urged me on, his enthusiasm infectious yet unnerving. I took a deep breath and followed him down the stairs, the air growing cooler and more oppressive with each step. As we descended, I noticed strange markings on the walls, symbols I couldn't decipher, etched into the peeling paint. They sent a shiver down my spine, making me question why I was still there. I glanced back, but the way we had come seemed to fade into darkness, the exit feeling farther away than ever. At the bottom of the stairs, we entered a small, dimly lit room. The only light came from Jake's phone, casting eerie shadows that flickered like ghosts. It was filled with old furniture, but what caught my eye was a large mirror on the far wall. Its surface was cracked, reflecting distorted images of us. I felt a rush of nausea as I stared into it, the reflection seeming to warp, twisting my features into something grotesque. Jake moved closer, his face lit by excitement as he examined the mirror. I could feel something shift in the atmosphere, a tension building that sent my heart racing. I wanted to turn back, to leave this place behind, but I was frozen in place, my instinct screaming at me to run. Suddenly, the light from Jake's phone flickered, plunging us into near darkness. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. The shadows seemed to thicken, wrapping around us like tendrils of smoke. In that moment, I realized Jake had stopped talking. I turned to see him staring at the mirror, his expression transfixed with an intensity that was unsettling. I stepped back, fear clawing at my throat as the shadows seemed to pulse, drawing closer. I called out to him, but my voice felt small and distant. As I turned to leave, the mirror caught my eye once more. In its depths, I saw a figure standing behind me, a twisted reflection of Jake, grinning in a way that sent ice through my veins. I bolted for the stairs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear footsteps behind me, echoing in the darkness, but I didn't dare look back. I stumbled up the steps, my heart pounding in my ears. The door was just ahead, a sliver of light beckoning me like a lifeline. I pushed it open, bursting into the cool night air. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, fumbling with my keys as I glanced back at the building, the shadows now silent and still. I could barely breathe, my heart racing as I jumped into the driver's seat. I drove away, the night swallowing me whole, desperate to put distance between myself and that place. But as I pulled into my driveway, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out to see a message from Jake. "You shouldn't have left. We were just getting started." I froze, the words chilling me to the core. I looked up, my gaze drawn to the mirror in my hallway, a twisted reflection waiting to unveil itself. I had never been a fan of dating apps. Something about swiping through faces like they were some sort of grocery list always felt off to me. But after a rough breakup and the endless nights of scrolling through the same old Netflix catalog, I figured it was time to give it a shot. I signed up for Hinge, thinking it would be a casual way to meet someone new. The app had this quirky vibe I thought I could handle. Everyone seemed to have a fun little story or a weird question to answer, so I dove in. My first few matches were predictable. Nice guys, decent conversations, but nothing clicked. I was about to give up when I came across a profile that caught my eye. His name was Mark, and his photos showed him in various outdoor settings, hiking up mountains, sitting by a campfire, and even a picture of him with a massive dog that looked like it could pull a sled. His bio was simple yet intriguing. Adventurer at heart, looking for someone to share the thrill of the unknown. It felt like a challenge, one I was surprisingly eager to accept. We chatted for a few days, and with every message, I felt a little more drawn to him. He had this easygoing way about him, the kind that made you feel comfortable right away. There was something about his words that made me picture him as someone who could be trusted, someone safe. We decided to meet at a cozy little cafe that was tucked away in a quiet part of town, perfect for getting to know each other without the pressures of a crowded bar. The day arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves as I walked into the cafe. It had this rustic charm, with wooden beams and mismatched furniture that gave it a homey feel. I spotted Mark almost immediately. He was sitting at a corner table, his tall frame hunched over a steaming cup of coffee. He looked up as I approached, and a smile broke across his face, lighting up his features in a way that made my heart race. We talked for hours, losing track of time as we shared stories and laughed about our lives. The conversation flowed so easily. It felt like I had known him forever. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the cafe windows, Mark leaned in and suggested we take a walk through the nearby park. The idea sounded perfect, so we headed out, the air cool against my skin. The park was beautiful, with winding paths and towering trees that whispered secrets in the breeze. We wandered along, chatting about everything and nothing, when Mark suggested we check out a small trail that led deeper into the woods. I hesitated for a moment, the creeping doubt nagging at the back of my mind, but the adventurous spirit in me won over, and I agreed, feeling a thrill at the thought of exploring something new. As we ventured down the trail, the trees thickened, and the sounds of the city faded away. It felt like we had stepped into another world, one that was quiet and serene. But as we walked, I started to notice an unsettling change in the atmosphere. The air grew heavier, and the light seemed to dim, swallowed by the encroaching darkness of the forest. I tried to shake off the unease, reminding myself that this was just a hike with a guy I liked. Mark seemed to be in his element, chatting animatedly about his love for nature and the adventures he had experienced. But there was something in his tone that felt a bit off, like he was trying too hard to keep the mood light. We reached a small clearing where the trees opened up to reveal a stunning view. I took a deep breath, trying to enjoy the beauty of the moment, but the tightness in my chest wouldn't go away. As we stood there, I glanced around, taking in the stillness. A sense of foreboding crept over me. It was just us, the trees, and the faint rustle of leaves. I felt exposed, like something was watching us from the shadows. I forced myself to focus on Mark, who was now animatedly gesturing toward the horizon, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The conversation shifted as Mark began sharing a story about a camping trip gone wrong, something about getting lost in the woods for days. The way he recounted it was almost too vivid, too detailed. I felt a chill run through me as he described the panic, the desperation. It was as if he had been reliving the experience, and I couldn't help but wonder if there was something more to it. Was he trying to tell me something? I tried to laugh it off, but my heart was racing. I suggested we head back, feeling the weight of the encroaching darkness pressing in on me. Mark agreed, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes that made me uneasy. As we retraced our steps, the forest felt more oppressive, the air thick with tension. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves set my nerves into overdrive. By the time we reached the path leading back to the park, I was relieved, but the sense of dread lingered. Mark seemed to sense my unease, and his demeanor shifted. He was no longer the charming, easygoing guy I had met earlier. There was a coolness in his voice, a subtle change that made my skin crawl. I quickened my pace, wanting to put distance between us. As we approached the cafe, Mark slowed down, his expression unreadable. He reached for my hand, and I instinctively pulled away, feeling a surge of panic. The warmth of the cafe felt like a beacon, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had entered a different kind of danger. I could sense it, the shift in the air, as if the world around us had transformed into something sinister. Mark stepped closer, and I could see the flicker of frustration in his eyes. The charm was gone, replaced by something darker. I felt trapped, my heart pounding as I glanced around for an escape. There was a moment of silence, thick with unspoken words, and in that instant, I realized I had misread him entirely. Before I could react, he grabbed my wrist, the grip tight and possessive. My mind raced as I struggled against him, panic flooding my senses. I could feel the weight of the forest behind us, the shadows closing in. Just as I was about to scream, a loud crash echoed from the cafe, the door bursting open as a group of patrons spilled out, startled by the sudden noise. In that moment, Mark hesitated, his grip loosening, and I seized the opportunity to break free. I sprinted toward the cafe, my heart pounding in my chest as I burst through the door. I turned to look back, but Mark was gone, swallowed by the darkness of the trees. The patrons were staring at me, their expressions a mix of concern and confusion as I gasped for breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I never saw Mark again. When I reported the incident, the police found nothing, no trace of him in the woods, no sign of the charming adventurer who had turned into my worst nightmare. It felt surreal, like a twisted story that had come to life. I deleted the app that same night, vowing never to venture into the world of online dating again. But even now, months later, I still feel that lingering unease. Every time I hear a rustle in the trees or see a figure in the distance, my heart races, and I can't help but wonder if I'll run into him again. The thrill of the unknown can be exhilarating, but sometimes it hides horrors that are better left undiscovered. I never thought a dating app could lead me to something so twisted. When I first downloaded Hinge, it was mostly out of boredom. My friends were all getting into relationships, posting their blissful couple photos, and I was sitting at home with my cat, contemplating the last season of that show I binged way too quickly. Swiping through profiles felt like a game at first, just a way to kill time, nothing serious. Then I stumbled across her. Her name was Claire, and her profile was like a breath of fresh air. She had this quirky sense of humor and an infectious smile that made me feel like I was staring at a work of art. We matched, and the conversation flowed easily. We shared interests in horror movies, late-night snacks, and the occasional existential crisis. It felt like I had found someone who really understood me. After a week of texting and exchanging random memes, We decided to meet up in person. We chose a local coffee shop, a cozy little place with vintage decor and a reputation for serving the best pumpkin spice lattes this side of town. The day of the date, my heart raced with excitement and a hint of nervousness. I arrived early, scanning the room for a glimpse of her. The cafe was dimly lit, with the warm glow of fairy lights hanging from the ceiling, creating an atmosphere that was both inviting and a little eerie. I sipped my coffee, trying to calm the butterflies in my stomach. When Claire finally walked in, I felt a spark. She was even more beautiful in person, and as we talked, her laughter echoed through the tiny space, making me forget about everyone else around us. But as our conversation deepened, I noticed something odd about her. She had this intensity in her gaze, like she was peering into my soul. At first, I thought it was just part of her charm, but as the minutes ticked by, it began to feel unsettling. She would ask me questions that seemed too personal for a first date, probing into my childhood, my fears, and even my darkest thoughts. Despite the growing unease, I couldn't help but be drawn to her. There was something magnetic about her that kept me engaged. We talked for hours, and I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't with anyone else. She shared her own stories, too. Tales of her past relationships, her struggles, and a lingering sense of loneliness that resonated with me. As the night wore on, she suggested we take a walk around the nearby park. The air was crisp, and the moon cast a silvery glow on the path. We walked side by side, the conversation flowing almost effortlessly. But the further we ventured into the park, the more I felt an unsettling shift in the atmosphere. The trees loomed overhead, their branches swaying like skeletal fingers in the wind. Claire's demeanor changed too. Her laughter faded, replaced by a more serious tone. She began to speak about fear, how it can consume someone if they let it. I chuckled, trying to lighten the mood, but she only looked at me with those intense eyes, like she was daring me to confront my own demons. I tried to steer the conversation back to lighter topics, but she seemed relentless. She spoke of a friend who had gone missing recently and how it had affected her. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was one thing to talk about fears and insecurities, but to bring up something so dark made me uneasy. As we continued walking, the park grew quieter, the sounds of the city fading into the background. I could feel the tension rising, and my instincts screamed that something was off. Claire suggested we sit on a bench, and against my better judgment, I agreed. The chill of the metal bench seeped through my coat, and I suddenly felt trapped. While we sat there, Claire leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. She talked about how people hide their true selves behind masks, how they pretend to be something they're not. I felt exposed, like she could see right through me. The way she spoke felt almost predatory, and I fought the urge to stand up and leave. But I didn't. For some reason, I stayed. Maybe it was the intrigue, or perhaps I was too curious about where this was going. It was like a car crash. I couldn't look away. Just then, her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, glancing at the screen. Her expression darkened, and an edge of panic crept into her voice. "I have to go," she said suddenly, her eyes darting around like a deer in headlights. I felt a jolt of confusion. It was so abrupt, so unlike the Claire I'd been talking to. Before I could ask her what was wrong, she stood up and hurried away, leaving me sitting there, bewildered and alone. I watched her disappear into the shadows, my mind racing. The chill in the air intensified, and I began to feel the weight of the night pressing down on me. I decided it was time to leave too. As I walked back toward the cafe, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. When I got home, I turned on my phone, half expecting a message from Claire. Nothing. I felt a mix of disappointment and relief. But then, as I scrolled through my notifications, I stumbled across something that made my heart race. It was a news alert about a string of disappearances in the city, with a chilling mention of a woman who had been seen with the victims before they vanished. My stomach dropped. I could hardly breathe as I read on. The article described a woman matching Claire's description, detailing how she was known for luring men under the guise of dating, only to vanish without a trace. I felt like I was in a horror movie, the kind where you scream at the screen, begging the character not to go into the dark basement. Panicking, I tried to call Claire, but the call went straight to voicemail. I texted her, hoping for any response, but nothing came. Hours passed, and I was glued to the news, refreshing the page, desperate for more information. Finally, just before dawn, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. My heart raced as I opened it. There was no text, just a photo. It was blurry, but my stomach sank as I recognized the background. It was the park bench where we had sat. The person in the photo was Claire, but her expression was different. She was staring directly at the camera, a hollow smile stretching across her face, her eyes dark and empty. The photo felt like a warning, and I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that enveloped me. Shaking, I decided to go back to that park. The sun was barely rising, casting eerie shadows on the path. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the bench. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, and I felt an unshakable sense of being watched. As I reached the bench, I noticed something glinting in the grass. I bent down and my heart stopped. It was a charm bracelet, the same one Claire had been wearing on our date. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Then, from behind me, I heard a soft laugh, her laugh. My blood ran cold as I turned around, but the park was empty. I was alone, with nothing but the echo of my own fear. The reality hit me like a wave. I had been drawn in, caught in a web I didn't even know existed. Suddenly, the laughter echoed again, this time closer, more sinister, and I realized I was not the only one in the park. The shadows shifted, and from the trees, Claire stepped out, her smile wide, but now it felt twisted, her eyes glinting with something dark. "You came back," she said, her voice dripping with a chilling sweetness. I backed away, my heart racing, as the pieces fell into place. This wasn't a date anymore. It was a game, and I was the prey. As I turned to run, the world around me blurred, the trees closing in like walls. Nothing would ever be the same again. I was trapped, ensnared by the very darkness I had sought to escape. I found myself scrolling endlessly through the apps, swiping left and right, trying to fill that void. That's when I stumbled upon Hinge. The concept seemed harmless enough. Create a profile, share a few personal tidbits, and match with people who have similar interests. Easy, right? I set up my profile, filled it with witty comments and half-decent pictures. After a few days of swiping, I matched with someone named Claire. She seemed perfect on paper, an artist, passionate about music, and with a love for horror movies. We hit it off quickly, sharing our favorite films and bonding over our mutual appreciation for the macabre. I found myself increasingly drawn to her. Her messages were like little bursts of energy that made my mundane days feel electric. After a week of chatting, we decided to meet up. Claire suggested a small diner on the outskirts of town. It was an old place, the kind of joint that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. The flickering neon sign outside buzzed like a fly trapped in a jar, and inside, the red vinyl booths were cracked and worn, giving the place a nostalgic charm. I arrived early and took a seat near the window, trying to calm my nerves while peering at the rain-soaked streets outside. When Claire walked in, she was even more captivating in person. Her dark hair framed her face perfectly, and her smile lit up the dim diner. We talked for hours, sharing stories and laughing as if we had known each other forever. But as the evening wore on, I noticed something unsettling about her. It wasn't anything overt, just a flicker in her eyes when she spoke about her art. There was a darkness lurking beneath the surface, a shadow that seemed to cling to her words. I brushed it off, convincing myself it was simply her artistic nature. Maybe it was the movies we'd been discussing, or perhaps I was just projecting my own recent heartbreak onto her. The night ended with a promise to meet again. I walked Claire to her car, and as we said goodbye, she leaned in closer than expected, brushing her lips against my cheek. It sent a thrill down my spine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Days passed, and we continued to see each other. Each date was a mix of laughter and uneasy tension. Claire began inviting me to her studio, an old warehouse turned art space, where she created her pieces. The moment I stepped inside, I felt like I had entered her mind. The walls were covered in her paintings, vivid, chaotic displays of color and form that evoked sensations of unease. There were canvases of distorted faces, bodies twisted in unnatural positions, and shadows that seemed to dance just out of reach. One evening, as we were surrounded by her art, Claire pulled out her latest piece, revealing it draped under a dusty sheet. When she pulled it off, my breath caught in my throat. It was a portrait of me, but not the way I saw myself. The eyes were hollow, dark, as if some part of me had been stripped away. I felt exposed, vulnerable under her gaze. "It's a work in progress," she said, a hint of something sinister in her tone. I smiled, but it felt forced. The air in the room thickened, and I found myself wanting to escape, to break the spell she seemed to have cast over me. I made an excuse and left her studio, the feeling of dread following me home. As the days turned into weeks, I started to notice strange occurrences. I'd find little things out of place in my apartment. A mug moved from the counter, a book turned upside down, the curtains drawn tighter than I remembered. I brushed it off as my own forgetfulness, until one night, I received a message from Claire. "Can I come over? I have something important to show you." The message sent a chill down my spine. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I texted back, agreeing to let her in. When she arrived, she seemed more excited than usual, her eyes gleaming with an intensity that made me uneasy. She walked straight to the back of my apartment, where I had set up a small gallery of my own, prints of my favorite artworks, a few photos I'd taken during travels. Claire began examining each piece, her fingers brushing over the frames with an almost reverent touch. "Your taste is interesting," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. I tried to engage her in conversation, but she seemed lost in her own world, her mind racing ahead. Just as I was about to ask her what was on her mind, she turned abruptly, her gaze piercing through me. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Before I could respond, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small sketchbook. "I've been working on something for you." I took the sketchbook, flipping through the pages. Each drawing was more disturbing than the last, figures trapped in glass boxes, faces contorted in agony, and at the very end, a self-portrait of me. But this time, I looked terrified, eyes wide with fear. "Where did you get this?" I stammered, my heart pounding in my chest. "I can see things, you know. Things that others can't," she replied, her smile unsettling. In that moment, I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I was trapped in a nightmare, and there was no way out. I tried to back away, but she moved closer, her presence suffocating. The air turned cold, and I could feel her breath on my skin. Just when I thought I would break free, she leaned in and whispered, "You're meant to be part of my art, you know." The words echoed in my mind, a morbid mantra that sent me reeling. I stumbled back, knocking over a lamp that crashed to the floor. In that instant, I realized the truth, a twisted, horrifying realization that Claire was not just an artist. She was a predator, and I was her next masterpiece. I bolted for the door, heart racing, mind screaming for escape. But as I reached for the handle, I felt her hand wrap around my wrist, her grip like iron. I turned to face her, panic coursing through my veins. "Don't fight it," she urged, her voice low and hypnotic. "This is where you belong." With every ounce of strength, I yanked my arm free and burst through the door, sprinting down the hallway. I could hear her footsteps behind me, echoing like a drumbeat of doom. I raced into the night, the darkness swallowing me whole as I fled from the nightmare I had unwittingly walked into. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to erase Claire from my life. I deleted her number, blocked her on social media, and even avoided the diner where we first met. But no matter how hard I tried, I could still feel her presence lurking in the shadows, waiting for the moment I would let my guard down. Then, one evening, I received an unexpected package at my door. My heart dropped as I recognized the handwriting. Inside was a single canvas, blank except for a small note. "You can't escape your fate." As I stared at the empty canvas, a wave of realization washed over me. This was not just a warning, it was an invitation. My life had become her art, and in this twisted game, I was both the muse and the subject. I knew then that the real horror wasn't her chasing me. It was the fact that I was already trapped in her world, and there was no way out. I was scrolling through the app late one night, my thumb flicking through faces and bios like I was flipping through a magazine. It was a typical Tuesday. Nothing special about it, just the same old grind. My friends had been telling me to give this dating app a shot, and I figured, why not? I mean, what was the worst that could happen? I had my share of bad dates, but they mostly just ended in awkward small talk and an early exit. This night, however, felt different. I came across a profile that stopped me cold. His name was Aaron, and his picture showed him standing in front of a massive old tree, its twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers against a cloudy sky. His bio was short but intriguing. He mentioned a passion for horror movies and ghost stories, which instantly piqued my interest. I swiped right, feeling a mix of excitement and trepidation. I liked the idea of sharing spooky stories, maybe even going on a ghost hunt. We matched almost immediately, and he sent a message that gave me chills. It was simple but direct. I know a place where the spirits roam. My heart raced. It was a line straight out of a movie, but I was hooked. We chatted for a while, and he suggested we meet at an abandoned house on the outskirts of town. It was rumored to be haunted, and I could feel the adrenaline rush through me at the thought of exploring it together. I loved horror, and the idea of a real-life adventure was too tempting to resist. The night of our meeting arrived, and I felt a mix of excitement and nerves as I drove to the location. The house loomed ahead, a dilapidated structure with peeling paint and broken windows. It was surrounded by a thick line of trees that seemed to swallow the light of the moon. I parked my car, taking a deep breath before stepping out. The air was thick with humidity, and the sound of crickets filled the silence, creating an eerie symphony that made my skin prickle. I waited a few minutes, checking my phone to see if Aaron had messaged me. Nothing. I was about to turn back when I heard footsteps crunching on gravel. I turned to see him emerging from the shadows, a crooked smile on his face. He looked even better in person, his dark hair tousled and eyes sparkling with excitement. I felt an immediate connection, but there was something unsettling about the way he moved. It was almost too deliberate, like he was playing a role in some twisted play. Aaron led the way to the house, and as we stepped inside, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air was stale, filled with the scent of mold and decay. The floor creaked under our weight, and the dim light from his flashlight danced across the walls, revealing faded photographs and peeling wallpaper. He spoke softly, his voice barely above a whisper, as he recounted the history of the place. Stories of the family that had lived there, the tragic endings, the whispers of spirits that still lingered. As we explored, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Shadows flickered just beyond the beam of his flashlight, and I could swear I heard whispers echoing through the halls. It felt like the house was alive, breathing, watching us. I tried to laugh it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination running wild, but the tension was palpable. We made our way to the upstairs, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The atmosphere grew heavier, the air thick with anticipation. We stepped into a room that had clearly been untouched for years. Dust covered every surface, and the moonlight spilled through the cracked window, illuminating a shattered mirror on the wall. Aaron moved closer to it, his reflection mingling with the darkness behind him. He turned back to me, his eyes glinting with mischief. They say if you look into a broken mirror long enough, you might see something you're not meant to. I felt a chill creep over me as he said this, the air thickening around us. I wanted to laugh, to brush it off as just a silly story, but instead, I felt a knot form in my stomach. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. The temperature dropped, and a gust of wind swept through the room, rattling the window and sending a shiver down my spine. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but I stayed, frozen in place, captivated by the chaos around me. Aaron seemed unfazed, his smile widening as if he thrived on the fear. He suggested we do a little seance, just for fun, to connect with whatever spirits might be lingering. I hesitated, but the thrill of the unknown beckoned me closer. We sat in a circle, candles flickering around us, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. He held my hands, and I felt a rush of warmth from his grip, but it quickly turned cold again as he began to chant softly, his voice echoing in the stillness. As he continued, the atmosphere shifted once more. The air grew denser, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. I wanted to pull away, to scream, but something held me in place. It was as if an unseen force was pushing down on me, and I could feel the pulse of the house around us, throbbing in time with the chance. And then, just like that, it stopped. Aaron released my hands and leaned back, his smile gone, replaced by an unsettling seriousness. "They're here," he said, his voice low and haunting. I could see shadows shifting in the corners of my vision, and panic surged through me. I wanted to run, to escape this nightmare, but I was rooted to the spot. The shadows seemed to grow closer, swirling around us, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. I could see faces forming in the darkness, twisted and anguished, and I realized with a jolt that these weren't just spirits. They were trapped souls, lingering in this forsaken place. I could feel their despair, their anger, and it wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. I turned to Aaron, but he was no longer the charming guy I had met earlier. His eyes were wide, almost manic, as he stared into the shadows. It was as if he was in a trance. I tried to shake him, to bring him back to reality, but he didn't respond. Instead, he reached out toward the darkness, as if trying to grasp something just out of reach. In that moment, I understood that I was not just a spectator in this haunted drama. I was part of it, entwined in a web of horror that I couldn't escape. I bolted for the door, my heart racing, adrenaline pumping through my veins. But as I turned, I saw it, the reflection of myself in the shattered mirror. Only it wasn't just me. Behind me, I could see the figures of the lost souls, their faces twisted in agony, reaching out to me with ghostly hands. I stumbled back, my breath hitching in my throat. The room felt like it was closing in, and I could hear the whispers growing louder, a cacophony of lamentations. I had to get out. I pushed past Aaron, who was still entranced, and sprinted down the stairs, my heart pounding like a war drum. I burst through the front door and stumbled into the night, gasping for air. The cool air hit me like a slap, and I felt the weight of the house lift as I put distance between us. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, fumbling with my keys as the adrenaline surged through me. I could still hear the whispers in my mind, swirling around like a storm. I drove home in a daze, the night blurring past me. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Aaron or the shadows following me. When I finally got home, I locked the door behind me and collapsed onto my bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had happened. Weeks passed, and I avoided the app, too terrified to even think about dating again. But a part of me couldn't shake the memory of that night, the thrill of the unknown, and the connection I felt with Aaron. I convinced myself it was just a bad night, a weird experience, and I needed to move on. Then, one evening, I received a notification. It was from the app, a message from Aaron. My heart raced as I clicked on it. The message was simple, chilling in its clarity. "I hope you're ready to join us." My breath caught in my throat as I felt the weight of dread settle over me again. I wanted to delete the app, to cut off all ties, but something held me back. The thrill of it all, the connection, it was intoxicating in a way I couldn't explain. I was drawn back in, teetering on the edge of a dark abyss, not yet realizing that the true horror had only just begun. I had never been one for online dating, but when the world shifted and everything moved to screens, I thought, why not? I created a profile on this Hinge app, half-heartedly swiping left and right, hoping for a spark. My friends were always telling me that the right person was just a click away. One night, after a few too many glasses of wine, I found myself mesmerized by a profile picture. His name was Ethan, and he had this charming smile that instantly drew me in. We matched, and I felt a rush of excitement. We chatted for a few days, swapping stories about our lives, our favorite movies, and our most embarrassing moments. There was something magnetic about our conversations. He had a way of making even mundane topics feel thrilling. When he suggested meeting up, I felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. It was just a coffee date, but it felt like it meant so much more. I could hardly sleep the night before, my mind racing with thoughts of what he would be like in person. The day arrived, and I chose a quaint little cafe tucked away in a side street, a place that felt warm and inviting. As I walked in, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wrapped around me like a comforting hug. I scanned the room, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I saw him, leaning against the counter, casually sipping his drink. He looked even better in person. His dark hair fell just right, and his eyes sparkled with mischief. I waved, a nervous smile spreading across my face as he approached. At first, everything felt perfect. We laughed, shared stories, and I felt a connection that I had never experienced before. But as the conversation deepened, I couldn't shake this creeping feeling in the back of my mind. It was as if the air around us thickened, and shadows danced in the corners of my vision. Ethan's smile was charming, but there was an intensity in his gaze that made me uneasy. I brushed it off, convincing myself that I was just overthinking things. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the cafe, Ethan suggested we take a walk. I hesitated for a moment, but his enthusiasm was infectious, and I didn't want to be the girl who said no. We strolled through the nearby park, the darkness creeping in as the trees loomed overhead. The atmosphere shifted. The laughter that had filled our earlier conversation faded, replaced by a heavy silence. I felt the cool breeze against my skin, but it did nothing to ease the growing tension between us. Ethan began to share stories about his childhood, but they took a strange turn. He spoke of his family in a way that felt off, as if he were hiding something beneath the surface. There was a story about a family house upstate that had been in his family for generations, a place filled with memories, but his tone changed, and I could sense something darker lurking within those tales. He described the house with such vividness that I imagined it, the peeling paint, the creaking floorboards, and the shadows that seemed to whisper secrets in the night. As we continued walking, my heart raced. I wanted to dismiss my unease, but it clung to me like a cold sweat. I forced myself to focus on the conversation, but my instincts were screaming for me to turn back. There was something about the way Ethan looked at me, something that felt predatory, as if he were sizing me up. I laughed at his jokes, trying to mask my discomfort, but the laughter felt forced, like I was performing for an audience that was nowhere to be found. Suddenly, he suggested we go to his family house. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. I blinked, trying to replay what he had just said. It felt too soon, too intense. I hesitated, searching for an excuse, but the look in his eyes made me freeze. There was an invitation there, challenge. I felt trapped, like a deer caught in headlights, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into something I didn't understand. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We drove in his car, the city lights fading into the distance as we ventured into the woods. The road twisted and turned, flanked by towering trees that seemed to close in around us. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The house appeared like a ghost out of the darkness, a dilapidated structure, its windows dark and hollow. My heart raced as we approached, the crunch of gravel beneath the tires echoing in the silence. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of age and neglect. Dust motes floated in the faint light, and I could feel the silence pressing down on me. Ethan seemed at ease, moving around the room with an almost unnatural grace, while I stood frozen, my instincts screaming that something was horribly wrong. He showed me the living room, where old photographs lined the walls, faces grinning back at me from another time. I couldn't shake the feeling that the eyes in those pictures were watching, judging. As we explored, Ethan's stories became more unsettling. He spoke of family traditions that seemed more like rituals, of strange occurrences that had haunted his family over the years. The way he described them, it was as if he were inviting me into a world I didn't belong in. I felt a chill run down my spine, and suddenly the shadows felt alive, creeping closer with every passing moment. I tried to change the subject, to steer the conversation away from the darkness that seemed to envelop us, but Ethan's eyes gleamed with a manic excitement. He insisted on showing me the basement, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to say no, to turn around and run, but a part of me was curious, drawn in by the thrill of the unknown. We descended the creaking stairs, the air growing colder with each step. The basement was dimly lit, cluttered with old furniture and boxes that had long been forgotten. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering like a heartbeat. As Ethan rummaged through the boxes, I felt a wave of unease wash over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was intruding on something deeply personal, something that was meant to remain hidden. Then I saw it, a small, ornate box tucked away in the corner. It was beautiful, intricately carved with strange symbols that seemed to pulse with energy. My curiosity piqued. I reached out to touch it, but Ethan's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with surprising force. His expression shifted, the warmth replaced by something darker, more primal. I felt a jolt of fear as his grip tightened, his voice low and urgent. As he began to speak, I could barely process his words. He was talking about legacy, about the power that box held. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as understanding dawned. This wasn't just a family heirloom. It was something sinister, a conduit for forces I couldn't comprehend. I stumbled back, my instincts screaming at me to leave. But Ethan stepped closer, his eyes wild with fervor. In that moment, I understood the truth. I wasn't just another date. I was a target. The house was a trap, and I had walked right into it. The shadows loomed larger, closing in around me as I turned to flee, adrenaline surging through my veins. I bolted up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest as I raced toward the exit. Ethan's footsteps echoed behind me, a haunting reminder of my mistake. I burst through the door, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. I sprinted toward my car, fumbling for my keys, my hands shaking. As I jumped in and slammed the door shut, I could see him standing in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the moonlight. My breath came in ragged gasps as I started the engine, praying it would turn over. The car roared to life, and I slammed it into gear, tires screeching as I sped away from that cursed place. My heart was still racing as I navigated the winding road, desperate to put distance between myself and the nightmare. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, my stomach dropped. Ethan was standing in the middle of the road, arms raised, a twisted smile plastered across his face. In that moment, I realized the truth. I had been lured into a game, a dark, twisted game. I raced down the road, the shadows of the trees closing in, but the horror of my encounter lingered in the air like a thick fog. I was free, but I knew I would never escape the grip of that night. The darkness would always follow me, a whisper in the back of my mind, reminding me of the chilling encounter that had changed everything. The idea of meeting someone online felt like stepping into a digital minefield, especially with the horror stories I'd heard from friends. But after a long stretch of being single and listening to friends rave about their successful matches, I finally caved and downloaded this popular dating app called Hinge. I figured, why not? Maybe I'd find someone interesting, or at the very least, I could just have a few fun conversations. The first few days were a whirlwind of swiping and chatting. I met a guy named Eric who seemed to check all the boxes. He was charming, had a great sense of humor, and his profile pictures showed him in cool outdoor settings, hiking, kayaking, and even a couple of cozy shots with his dog. I thought he was cute and intriguing, so we hit it off and decided to meet in person. He suggested a local cafe that had a vintage vibe, complete with mismatched furniture and quirky art on the walls. I loved it. The day of our date arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves and excitement. I arrived at the cafe early, my heart racing as I waited for him to show up. I scanned the room, taking in the eclectic decor and the chatter of other patrons. The warm scent of coffee filled the air, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that crept over me. Maybe it was just the nerves. When Eric finally walked in, I felt a rush of relief. He looked even better in person, with tousled hair and an easy smile. Our conversation flowed easily, and the initial awkwardness faded quickly. We talked about everything, our favorite movies, travel stories, even our families. But as the conversation deepened, I noticed something odd about him. He had a way of looking at me, a penetrating gaze that felt unsettling, as if he was trying to read my mind. I brushed it off as nerves, but I couldn't help but feel like he was studying me more than connecting with me. As we wrapped up our coffees and the sun began to set outside, Eric suggested we take a walk in the nearby park. I agreed, thinking it would be a nice way to continue our date. The park was beautiful, with tall trees lining the paths and the sound of leaves rustling in the breeze. The light was fading, casting long shadows that danced around us. I felt a chill creep up my spine, and not just from the cooling air. There was something in his demeanor that made me uneasy, but I ignored it, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid. We strolled along the path, and I tried to focus on the scenery rather than the unease gnawing at me. Eric talked animatedly about his love for hiking and nature, but every so often, he would pause and look at me with that penetrating gaze again. It felt like he was waiting for something, and it made me uncomfortable. I laughed at his jokes and tried to keep the mood light, but every time he looked at me, it felt like he was peeling back layers, looking for something deeper. As we walked, the park began to empty out. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the shadows grew darker and more ominous. My gut twisted with anxiety, and I considered making an excuse to leave. Just then, Eric suggested we head to a secluded area of the park. He said it was a beautiful spot to watch the stars. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I didn't want to seem rude, so I nodded and followed him down a narrow path that seemed to lead deeper into the trees. The further we went, the thicker the trees became, and soon we were surrounded by darkness. I could barely see where I was stepping, and that's when the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It felt like we were being swallowed by the night. Eric's voice carried a different tone now, a strange intensity that sent chills down my spine. He spoke softly, but there was an edge to his words that made me uneasy. I felt like I was losing control of the situation, and I didn't like it. Finally, we reached a small clearing, and Eric gestured to the sky, pointing out constellations. I forced a laugh, but my heart raced. The beauty of the stars above was overshadowed by the feeling that I had stepped into a trap. I took a step back, my instinct screaming at me to leave. But before I could turn around, Eric took a step closer, his expression shifting. The charming persona he had worn earlier melted away to reveal something darker. "Do you believe in fate?" he asked, his voice low and almost hypnotic. I felt my pulse quicken as I tried to maintain composure. I was caught off guard by the intensity of his gaze. It was like he was searching for an answer that would satisfy some unspoken need of his. The air around us grew thick with tension, and a shiver ran down my spine. I wanted to step away, to break the connection, but I found myself frozen in place, a rabbit caught in the headlights. Eric's expression shifted again, and I could see something flicker in his eyes, something unsettling, as if he were on the brink of revealing a dark secret. Just as I was about to turn and run, the sound of rustling leaves broke the silence. My heart leaped into my throat. I glanced around, half expecting someone to step out from the shadows, but it was just the wind. I turned back to Eric, and in that brief moment, I noticed something in his hand, a small, glinting object. Panic washed over me as I recognized it was a knife. I took a step back, my instinct screaming at me to get away. But instead of fear, Eric smiled, a twisted grin that sent ice through my veins. "I know this looks bad," he said, his voice dripping with an unsettling calmness. "But it's not what you think. I just wanted to make sure we're meant to be." Before I could process his words, he lunged toward me. Adrenaline shot through my veins, and I turned to run. The darkness engulfed me as I sprinted back down the path, branches clawing at me as I pushed through the underbrush. I could hear his footsteps behind me, growing closer, but I didn't dare look back. I burst into the open park, gasping for breath as I ran toward the streetlights, the distant sounds of the city pulling me back to safety. I glanced over my shoulder, and to my shock, Eric was gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The sense of relief was short-lived as I stumbled to a halt, my heart racing and my mind reeling. The park was empty and silent, and the shadows felt alive, creeping in closer. I could still see the glint of the knife in my mind, the twisted smile on his face. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. I hurried home, locking every door and turning on every light. The safety of my apartment felt like a flimsy shield against the darkness that had followed me. That night, I tossed and turned, trying to shake the image of Eric from my mind. It wasn't just the encounter that haunted me. It was the realization that I had let my guard down. I had played with fire, and now I was left with a burning ember of fear. Weeks passed, and I tried to move on, but the experience lingered. I deleted the app, convinced I would never want to date again. But late one night, as I scrolled through my social media, I came across a post that made my blood run cold. A photo of Eric. He was standing outside my apartment building. The caption read, "Can't wait to see you again. Fate has a funny way of bringing people together." What felt like a twisted game finally revealed itself. He wasn't just a stranger from an app. He had been watching me long before our date. The chilling realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The darkness wasn't just in the park. It had seeped into my life, and it was far from over. I never thought online dating would lead me down a path like this. I mean, sure, I'd heard the horror stories, people getting catfished, bad dates that turned into awkward encounters, but I always figured I'd be lucky. I swiped right on a guy named Mark one night while scrolling through Hinge. Just another bored Saturday. He looked decent enough, with a charming smile and a few interests that matched mine. We started chatting, and honestly, it felt easy. He was funny, and I liked that he didn't take himself too seriously. After a couple of days of texting back and forth, we decided to meet up. He suggested a coffee shop downtown, the kind with exposed brick walls and a rustic vibe. I arrived early, my head swimming with excitement and nerves. I could picture it in my head. We'd hit it off, share laughs over lattes, and then maybe take a stroll through the nearby park. But as time ticked by and I waited at a corner table, that excitement gradually morphed into anxiety. I glanced at my phone, refreshing our chat history to reassure myself that I hadn't misunderstood our meeting time. When he finally walked in, I felt a rush of relief. He was just as cute in person, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans that fit him just right. But something felt off. He walked straight towards me with a confident stride, but there was a glint in his eyes that sent a chill down my spine. I brushed it off as nerves and forced a smile as he introduced himself. Our small talk was light, but there was a strange intensity in his gaze that made me uncomfortable. As we sipped our drinks, I noticed he kept leaning in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper as he shared anecdotes. It felt like he was trying too hard to create intimacy too quickly. I laughed along, but a voice in my head whispered that something was amiss. The comfortable atmosphere of the cafe began to feel stifling, as if the walls were closing in. I tried to redirect the conversation to safer topics, but he seemed fixated on his stories, weaving in dark humor that didn't sit right. "Have you ever thought about how far people will go to find love?" he asked, his eyes narrowing as he leaned even closer. "I mean, it's kind of scary, right?" I laughed nervously, trying to brush off the unsettling vibe, but it lodged itself in my chest like a lead weight. After an hour, I suggested we take a walk. Fresh air might help. If nothing else, it would give me a chance to regain my composure. He agreed, and we stepped outside into the crisp evening air. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that danced along the pavement as we walked toward the park. The serene atmosphere felt in stark contrast to the unsettling energy Mark was radiating. As we strolled, he started asking deeper questions, probing into my past relationships and my fears. I answered cautiously, feeling like I was unwittingly revealing parts of myself to a stranger who seemed to know too much. The way he analyzed my responses felt more like an interrogation than a conversation, and I could feel my heart rate quicken. "Have you ever been in a situation where you felt truly trapped?" he asked, and I forced a laugh, trying to keep things light. "You know, like in a relationship that felt more like a prison?" The smile faltered on my lips as I glanced around, searching for an escape route. The park was eerily quiet, shadows stretching across the path, like fingers reaching out to grab me. I tried to change the subject again, but he persisted. "Sometimes, I think people are just a little bit broken. We all have our quirks, and they can make us interesting. But what happens when someone's quirks turn dangerous?" He said this with a casualness that made my skin crawl. I could feel a knot forming in my stomach, the instinct to run bubbling to the surface. The sun dipped lower, and the dimming light added to the sense of foreboding. I fumbled for my phone, pretending to check a message, looking for an excuse to leave. But when I glanced up, Mark was watching me intently, his expression unreadable. "Are you okay?" he asked, genuine concern lacing his voice, but it only added to the unease. I nodded, even as a whisper of doubt crept into my mind. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he was just nervous too. But then he stepped closer, invading my personal space. You seem tense. Are you scared of me? I laughed weakly, shaking my head, but inside I was screaming to get out of this situation. The park felt like a trap now, the trees looming like silent witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. I took a step back, trying to create distance, but he only took a step forward. His voice dropped lower, as if he were sharing a dark secret. You know, I've always believed that people show their true colors when they think no one is watching. It's fascinating, really. The masks we wear, the personas we create. That was it. I turned on my heel, ready to bolt, but he grabbed my wrist, holding me in place. The grip wasn't overly tight, but it was firm enough to stop me dead in my tracks. My heart raced, and I could feel the panic rising. Wait, he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. I didn't mean to scare you. I just want to understand. I yanked my wrist away and took a few hurried steps back, my mind racing for a plan. I needed to get away. I glanced around, hoping to see someone, anyone, but the park was empty, the streetlights flickering on one by one, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward me. Please don't go, he said, his tone shifting again, becoming more intense. I promise I'm not dangerous. I just want to know you. I didn't respond. I turned and started walking briskly, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear him following behind, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the park. I picked up my pace, adrenaline flooding my veins. The night air felt heavy, and I could sense him gaining on me. As I reached the edge of the park, I saw a figure in the distance, an older man walking a dog. I sprinted toward him, my breath coming in quick gasps. I could feel Mark's presence behind me, but I didn't dare look back. Help! I shouted, and the man turned, surprised. I rushed past him, not stopping to explain. I didn't look back to see if Mark was still there. I dashed down the street, the city lights blurring past me. I didn't stop until I reached my apartment, slamming the door shut behind me. I leaned against it, my heart racing, trying to catch my breath. The panic began to fade, replaced by a creeping disbelief that this was real. I pulled out my phone, ready to block Mark, but before I could, a message popped up from him. I didn't mean to scare you. I just wanted to show you how easy it is to fall into the dark. I stared at the screen, chills running down my spine. Then I noticed something else. The profile picture I had swiped right on was gone, replaced by a new one. It was a blurry image of me from earlier that night, taken from the shadows of the park. My heart sank as the realization hit me. He hadn't just been a stranger. He had been watching me the entire time,